Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a pretty hot topic today. Um, Bitcoin's energy usage.
Yeah, it's one of those things that gets brought up constantly, right?
Definitely. It's hard to miss the headlines about Bitcoin using tons of electricity enough to power countries. Right.
Right. It's technically true, but there's always more to the story.
That's what we're here for. Today, we're going to go deeper. Like, why does Bitcoin even need energy in the first place?
Exactly. And is it always a bad thing?
Yeah. We might even uncover some surprising benefits along the way. Stuff that doesn't usually make the headlines.
Like how it could actually be good for the environment in some cases.
Exactly. So, to kick things off, we need to clarify what Bitcoin is actually for.
Right, because it's more than just buying pizza with magic internet money. It's about solving a real problem.
Yeah, the problem of needing a way to store and transfer value that no single entity can control or censor.
Think about it. What happens when you can't access your own money because of government
Or
restrictions?
when hyperinflation makes your savings basically worthless.
Those are the realities for a lot of people around the world, unfortunately.
Right. And we've got some pretty powerful examples of how Bitcoin is being used in those exact situations.
Like, we've got stories of Venezuelan refugees using Bitcoin to escape hyperinflation.
And Nigerian merchants using it to bypass currency controls.
Even Russian opposition leaders funding their movements when banks shut them out. Pretty powerful stuff.
It really highlights why a system like Bitcoin is so important to so many people.
It gives them financial freedom and independence that they wouldn't otherwise have.
Okay, so that makes sense. But it still doesn't answer the energy question, right? Like,
Oh.
why does securing this system require so much electricity?
Okay, so it all comes down to this thing called proof of work.
Proof of work.
Yeah. It's basically a competition where miners use specialized computers to solve really complex math problems.
Sounds intense.
It is, and it's energy intensive for sure.
Right.
But it's also what verifies all the transactions and keeps the entire network secure.
So the more energy the network uses, the more secure it becomes.
Exactly. The energy acts as like a barrier to entry for anyone who wants to attack the network
Right. Makes sense.
because they would have to outspend every other miner on the network,
Right.
which gets really expensive.
I see.
It's like a super high-tech security system.
It's interesting, though, right? Because people always bring up the energy cost per transaction with Bitcoin. Yeah, it's a common criticism.
But doesn't that seem kind of misleading? It's like comparing the energy use of a jumbo jet to a bicycle, just because they both transport people?
That's a great analogy. People miss the scale of what Bitcoin is designed to handle. It's built for massive value transfer globally.
Yeah. And our research actually compares it to the Fedwire system that handles trillions of dollars every day.
That's a much better comparison, right?
Yeah.
Because the Bitcoin network is designed to be that secure base layer for global settlement.
Right. And then you have things like the Lightning Network, which is built on top of Bitcoin for smaller everyday transactions.
It's like having different tools for different jobs. You wouldn't use a freight train to go grocery shopping, right? So Bitcoin can be both secure and efficient depending on what you're using it for.
That's the key takeaway here. It's versatile.
Okay, so we've kind of tackled the why of Bitcoin's energy use.
Yeah.
But now let's get into the how, because this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, this is where the narrative flips a little bit.
Exactly. What if I told you that Bitcoin miners are actually incentivized to find the cheapest, greenest energy sources out there?
That's the cool part. Because their energy costs directly impact their profits, miners are always searching for the best deals, like constantly.
So they're not just looking for any energy, they're looking for energy that would otherwise be wasted or underutilized.
Which often means renewable sources, right?
Right. Like, we came across some crazy stories about miners setting up shop next to hydroelectric dams in Sichuan, China.
Taking advantage of all that excess power during the rainy season.
And they're capturing gas that would otherwise be burned off from oil fields,
Flared gas, terrible for the environment.
Terrible.
Uh-huh.
And some are even using methane emissions from landfills.
It's almost like a scavenger hunt for energy that nobody else wants.
And it's actually good for the planet.
It's a win-win. Miners get cheap energy and the environment benefits.
Hold on. I got to share this stat. It blew my mind. The amount of gas flared globally each year releases more greenhouse gases than the entire Bitcoin network at its peak.
Wow, that puts things in perspective.
And these miners could potentially cut global flaring by a huge amount, like 20%, just by using this waste gas.
That's a huge impact. So it's not just about using energy, it's about incentivizing good behavior.
Right, and that's just the beginning.
There's a lot more to uncover.
So we've seen how miners are basically turning trash into treasure using
Yeah.
wasted energy.
It's a pretty neat trick.
It is. But let's zoom out a bit, big picture stuff. What does this all mean for the future of renewable energy?
Well, I think Bitcoin mining could actually be a huge driver of renewable energy adoption.
Really? How so?
Okay, think about it. Most industries need stable power, right? Like they need to know the lights will stay on. But Bitcoin miners are totally different. They can set up shop pretty much anywhere.
Oh, so they're not tied to a specific location.
Exactly. And increasingly, the cheapest energy is coming from renewable sources, right? Solar, wind, all that.
So you're saying that instead of building power plants near big cities, we might see a world where energy infrastructure is built around where the sun shines the most or where the wind blows the strongest.
Yeah. And it's all thanks to Bitcoin miners. They're like the pioneers of this new energy landscape.
Wow, that's a really interesting thought.
Right. Like picture massive solar farms in the desert powering Bitcoin mines.
And then that excess energy goes back to the grid,
Exactly. Or coastal regions with wind farms and tidal power all working together.
creating a totally sustainable energy ecosystem.
It's a pretty exciting vision for the future.
It is. And it's not just a pipe dream either. Our research actually found tons of examples of this happening right now. Like companies are building solar farms specifically to power their Bitcoin mining operations.
And taking advantage of all those sweet, sweet tax credits.
Plus, it's creating new revenue streams for renewable energy developers.
So it's a win-win for everyone involved.
Love it when that happens. Okay, so we've got cheap renewable energy, but what about grid stability?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Because solar and wind are intermittent, right?
Yeah.
The sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow.
Yep. It's a headache for grid operators who need to keep supply and demand balanced at all times.
That's where Bitcoin miners come in, right? They can act as a buffer.
Like giant decentralized battery.
Exactly. They can ramp up their operations when there's excess energy on the grid.
And then power down when demand spikes.
It's like a built-in shock absorber for the entire energy system.
Pretty cool, huh?
Super cool. And it's actually happening. We found an example from Texas where a Bitcoin mining company helped stabilize the grid during a heat wave.
They basically shut down their operations to free up energy for everyone else.
It prevented blackouts and saved residents a ton of money.
It's a perfect example of how Bitcoin can be a force for good in the energy space.
So we've talked a lot about proof of work, which is this energy-intensive way of securing the Bitcoin network.
It gets a lot of attention, for sure.
It does. But there's this other model out there called proof of stake, which is supposed to be much more energy efficient. Can you explain how that works?
Sure. So with proof of stake, instead of using energy to solve math problems, people validate transactions by staking their coins.
Staking their coins.
Yeah, like they put up a certain amount of their own crypto as collateral.
To prove they're not going to mess things up.
Exactly. It's like a security deposit.
So no more energy guzzling mining rigs.
Theoretically, no. Proof of stake uses way less energy.
Sounds like a good thing, right? Better for the environment.
On the surface, yeah, but it's not quite that simple.
Yeah. What's the catch?
Well, one of the big concerns is centralization.
Meaning what, exactly?
So with proof of stake, the people with the most coins have the most power.
That doesn't sound very decentralized.
Right. It kind of goes against the whole point of Bitcoin, which is to create a system where no single entity has control.
Yeah, I see your point.
And remember, Bitcoin was created to eliminate the need for trusting third parties. Proof of work does that. Proof of stake, not so much.
So it's a trade-off.
Really,
Yeah,
exactly. Less energy, but potentially less decentralization.
That's something to think about.
Yeah.
Are there any other potential downsides?
Yeah, so proof of stake can be more complex and potentially more vulnerable to certain types of attacks.
Oh.
And it's still a relatively new technology, so there's a lot we don't know yet.
So there's definitely some risk involved.
There's always risk with new technology. It's about weighing the pros and cons.
Okay, so it's not just about energy efficiency. It's about the core principles of Bitcoin.
Right. Decentralization, security, censorship resistance, it's a whole package.
Okay, so we've dug into how Bitcoin uses energy, the pluses and minuses, and even compared it to that proof of stake thing.
Right, but let's be real for a sec. There's still a ton of misinformation out there about Bitcoin and energy.
Yeah, it feels like people are quick to jump to conclusions.
It's understandable, right? When you've got something new and disruptive challenging the norms.
Exactly. And the energy debate is an easy target for criticism.
For sure.
One of the most common ones I hear is that, like, Bitcoin is this environmental disaster waiting to happen, that it's going to, like, single-handedly fry the planet.
Right. It's almost like a default talking point for some people.
It is.
Yeah.
So how do we respond to that? What's the counter argument?
Well, I think we've got to bring it back to the data. Like we talked about how Bitcoin's energy use is actually a tiny fraction of the global total.
Way less than what all the world's household appliances use, right?
Right. And a good chunk of that energy is already coming from renewables.
Yeah, the Bitcoin Mining Council surveys say it's over 50%, and that number's only going up.
Exactly. Miners are incentivized to go green.
Because green means cheap, right?
Exactly.
And the coolest part is, Bitcoin mining isn't just using renewables, it's actually helping to grow the renewable energy sector.
Right, because it creates this constant demand for renewable energy, which makes those projects more financially attractive.
That's huge. It means more investment, more innovation, more deployment.
Yep. It's a positive feedback loop.
I love it when that happens. There was this awesome example from El Salvador.
Oh, yeah, the volcano-powered Bitcoin mine.
Right. Not only did it bring clean energy to this remote community, but it also spurred investment in geothermal energy infrastructure for the whole country.
Talk about a win-win. I mean, that's the kind of impact we're talking about here.
Exactly. Bitcoin can be a catalyst for real change, especially in places that need it the most.
Absolutely.
Okay, but even with all the renewables, some people still say Bitcoin is diverting energy that could be used for other things.
Yeah, that's a common critique.
So how do we address that?
We got to remember that energy markets are, like, super complex, right? It's not like miners are stealing energy from other people.
We're often using energy that would otherwise be wasted.
Exactly. Like all those stranded energy sources we talked about.
Excess hydro, flared gas, landfill gas.
Right, stuff that's just being thrown away because there's no market for it.
And Bitcoin creates that market. It turns trash into treasure.
It's a beautiful thing.
Plus, it can actually make renewables more reliable and cost-effective by providing a flexible demand source.
Right, like that example from Texas.
Where the miners shut down to help stabilize the grid during a heat wave.
Save the day.
Yeah. It shows that Bitcoin can actually complement the transition to clean energy, not hinder it.
I think that's a really important point to get across.
It is. So I guess the takeaway here is that the Bitcoin energy debate is a lot more nuanced than people think.
Way more. It's not black and white, good versus evil.
It's about finding creative solutions to complex problems.
And aligning incentives with the things we want to see happen in the world.
Love that. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty optimistic after this deep dive.
Me too. It's easy to get caught up in the negativity, but there's a lot of potential here.
Huge potential. And I think Bitcoin is pushing us to think differently about energy, about innovation, about the future.
It's a challenge, for sure, but it's also an opportunity.
Couldn't said it better myself. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into Bitcoin's energy usage.
Hope you all learned something new.
And maybe even changed your mind about a thing or two.
We encourage you to keep digging deeper, challenge your own assumptions, and keep those conversations going.
Because the future of energy is too important to leave to chance.
Thanks for listening.
We'll catch you next time.